Hello students, welcome to the program. The topic selected for the program is adjustment mechanism. The objectives set for this program are to understand what an adjustment mechanism is, to know about the defensive mechanism and the escapist mechanism, and to understand different types of adjustment mechanisms with the help of examples. Mental mechanism or adjustment mechanism. Every individual has different types of needs and goals, which he always attempts to attain. But due to some external or internal factors, it's not possible for him to achieve these goals all the time. In such cases, sometimes people may suffer from frustration. In such a situation, an individual may react in different ways. He may attack physically the source of frustration to reduce his mental tension, or he may destroy the object of frustration. He may use different mental mechanisms to beat his frustration and adjust himself to protect his ego. Whenever man is faced with a situation which promises serious consequences for his mental balance, a state of conflict or injury, and he is not successful in achieving any direct adjustment with that situation, then in order to attain such an adjustment, he takes recourse to certain defensive or escapist situations that certainly do satisfy the drive or motive even without attaining the actual objective. These mental constructions are called mental mechanisms. As for example, a student wanted to become a doctor, but he could not manage a seat for the course. In that case, he may become frustrated, as he could not be able to meet his need. In such case, he may behave in different ways. Either he may opt for a paramedical course or may give up his studies, or he may even opt for arts course. Mental mechanisms lie between a state of health and disease, since their presence in the normal individual does not lead to any harm, but when they develop to an excess extent, mental health of the individual is endangered and abnormality becomes possible. In some areas of psychology, psychologists talk about mental mechanisms as manners in which we behave or think in certain ways to better protect or defend ourselves. Mental mechanisms are one way of looking at how people distance themselves from a full awareness of unpleasant thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. Sigmund Freud was one of the first proponents of this construct. Mental mechanism may result in healthy or unhealthy consequences, depending on the circumstances and frequency the mechanism is used. In Freudian psychoanalytic theory, mental mechanisms are psychological strategies brought into play by the unconscious mind to manipulate, deny, or distort reality in order to defend against feelings of anxiety and unacceptable impulses to maintain one's self-schema. All the mental mechanisms can be divided into two categories: the defensive mechanism and the escapist mechanism. Defense mechanisms are usually unconscious mental mechanisms by which psychic tension is diminished. The aim of defensive mechanisms is to defend the individual from various harmful experiences, and in this form they are useful. Defensive mechanisms help in individuals' adjustment. Through their medium, the individual protects himself from very injurious circumstances, and this improves his adjustment. On the other hand, Escapist mental mechanism has for its object the evasion of all circumstances and experiences that can pain or harm the individual. So the individual is prevented from experiencing much pain, but because he runs away from the situation, he sometimes falls prey to mental abnormality. Escapist mental mechanism only serves to hinder the adjustment sought to be established through them. An ego defense mechanism becomes pathological only when its persistent use leads to maladaptive behavior, such that the physical or mental health of individual is adversely affected. Dear students, the list of mental mechanism is huge and there is no theoretical consensus on the exact number. The Journal of Personality published a special issue on mental mechanisms in 1998. Anna Freud, 1936, enumerated 10 mental mechanisms that appear in the work of Sigmund Freud. Both Anna Freud and her famous father, Sigmund Freud, studied mental mechanisms, but Anna spent more of her time and research on 5 main mechanisms. They are repression, regression, projection, reaction formation, and sublimation. Let us now try to understand some of the common mental mechanisms, both escapist and defensive, one by one in detail. Number first, fantasy. This is imagining of events which have not taken place or circumstances which do not exist as if they are doing or have done so. Fantasies become mental mechanisms when people subconsciously employ them as a source of pleasure and comfort for reducing the mental tension caused by wishes that cannot be realized or other problems that can't be dealt with. It's a very common mental mechanism in children and in immature people, that is, people who still behave more like children, and in schizophrenia. Hungry men dreaming of food is an example of fantasy. Fantasy is sometimes taken as synonymous to daydreaming. Daydream may be of 2 types. First, conquering hero type. In this type of daydream, the individual sees himself as confident and successful in all fields. For example, a person may see himself as a great musician who can make the audience spellbound. Second is suffering hero type. In this type of daydream, an individual develops sympathy for himself only. For example, a child who feels that he is being ill-treated at home may imagine himself as seriously ill. Second is compensation. Compensation is a tendency of human beings to make up the deficiency of one area or trait of development in another area. When a person fails in one area, he tries to compensate for his failure by trying to succeed in another area. The most potent example is Napoleon's drive for power. Probably his short figure and feminine build created in him a sense of inferiority, which in turn made him a power monger. Compensation may be of the various types as overcompensation, direct compensation, substitute compensation, indirect compensation, and neurotic compensation. Third is identification. This method operates outside likes and beyond conscious awareness, through which an individual makes himself like someone whom he has identified in any particular field. The elements identified for the purpose are thoughts, behavior, belief, tasks, and character. To identify with a person, a group, or an idea is not only to accept but also to become drawn in mind to the person's or group's face or to the idea. For example, someone who has low self-image or feels helpless may try to remove the feeling of being unknown or isolated by identifying with a popular figure, such as a pop star or a film star, or with a group or gang. Identification is a process by which an individual establishes a strong emotional tie with another person, a group of persons, or an institution. Through such ties, he achieves his satisfaction. He draws his strength from the strength of others. For example, infants identify themselves with their father or mother. Fourth one is projection. In the words of Freud, quote, "Projection is a process by which we describe to the external world the rejected impulses of id," unquote. We defend ourselves against our repressed guilt's feelings by projecting them into other things and people. Projection is the misattribution of a person's undesired thoughts, feelings, or impulses onto another person who does not have those thoughts, feelings, or impulses. In this method, an individual tries to defend himself against his repressed guilt feelings by projecting them into other things and people. Simple examples include blaming of failure at examination on insufficient time allowed for the paper, or bad luck, etc. Then coming to rationalization. It's a mechanism by which an individual devises socially acceptable reasons for some socially unacceptable acts or opinion, belief, faith, etc. When a person wants to do something but feels ashamed or embarrassed or afraid about disclosing the true motive, their mind may instead seize upon a more commendable, though false reason. There are generally two types of rationalization. These are, the first, sour grapes. When an individual fails to attain his goals after repeated efforts, he may say that he did not want it anyway. He adjusts to the frustration by denying the existence of any desire in him to attain the original goal. For example, a fox which could not reach the grapes and out of sheer frustration declares that grapes are sour. Boy, when he fails to qualify himself in the school football team, rationalizes his failure by saying that he does not want to play. The second is sweet lemon. When an individual is not satisfied with his achievement or the situation he is in, then he uses this form of rationalization. The individual who uses this method tries to convince himself that what he has is exactly what he wants. The example that makes it clear includes one young man who was quite distressed by his outsized heirs, but he soon hit upon the scheme of claim in that because of these elongated appendages, he was in a position to distinguish between the most subtle musical sounds. On the basis of this rationalization, however, he claimed to the extreme of taking training in music and succeeded in becoming a music teacher. Number 6 is withdrawal. Whenever an individual suspects that he is likely to be criticized, ridiculed, or disgraced on account of some prior unfortunate experience or failure, he resorts to what is known as withdrawal. This tendency of withdrawal is to be seen in the form of a shy, solitude, loving and frightened nature. Burkheim, in his book, The Normal Mind, has elucidated the condition of pseudo-feeble-mindedness in his example of very strong withdrawal. Such a state is less to be seen among adults than among youngsters. It's most often seen in weak individuals, and the policy that they adopt is that nothing attempted, nothing done can't win them any punishment or criticism and frustration, hence they do not take any interest in their work and do their best to avoid it. Then seventh is selective forgetting. One simple method of avoiding the pain of distressing circumstances is forgetting them. This forgetting is selective. Experiments have proved that painful experiences are forgotten sooner than soothing and pleasurable experiences. And usually we forget the promises that we do not want to remember or fulfill. Selective forgetting has three types: suppression, repression, and inhibition. Then eighth one is negativism. Many children manifest the tendency to do the precise opposite of anything that they have been directed to do. Whenever some of the desires of such children are thwarted, then they become obstinate, aggressive, and violent. They take to writing on the floor and are often ready to fight. They show a very great inclination to impose upon others, and in adult life give signs of very strong determination and obstinacy of a high order, not being very tractable. One very usual form of behavior in such persons is thinking themselves superior to the colleagues and the constant endeavor to prove this superiority. Then ninth is sublimation. The process of detaching the power of inspiration from its normal object to the achievement of a higher aim is called sublimation. An example will be Dante, a famous Italian poet, was one day pacing the streets of Florence and his eyes lighting on a beautiful girl named Beatrice. He fell in love with her. This young lady belonged to a very noble family. Consequently, there could be no union between Dante and Beatrice. And besides this meeting, Dante could never meet her in his life again. But this momentary meeting was the cause of most of Dante's love poetry. It is said that the great poet Tulsidas was so infatuated with his wife that he could not bear to be separated from her even for a day. And once, when she had gone to her parents' home, he followed her there, much to her embarrassment. She scolded him for his impatience and indiscretion and pointed out that it would do him a world of good if he could develop a similar devotion to one of the many gods. A precipitate man, Tulsidas, immediately changed his mode of life and became a great devotee of God. Then, reality evasion. One simple method, that of the ostrich, is simply to close one's eyes in trying to evade the painful and bitter experience arising out of the environment. Many people are immune to any and every criticism for the simple reason that they are not prepared to listen to it and keep their ears turned to a different wavelength. Almost all their difficult decisions are left for a tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow. An example will be when some very near and dear one in the family dies. Some people try to keep up the pretense that he is alive, and for this they resort to various tricks such as keeping the deceased person's belongings, and room in perfect order in the manner in which he used to maintain it during his lifetime. Its serious development can lead to the occurrence of mental disease and a high degree of abnormality in the individual. Then, denial. Denial is the refusal to accept reality or fact, acting as if a painful event, thought, or feeling did not exist. It is considered one of the most primitive of the defense mechanisms because it is characteristic of early childhood development. Many people use denial in their everyday lives in order to minimize or prevent an otherwise inevitable anxiety or similar unpleasant feelings such as anger, guilt, shame, frustration, etc. For instance, a person who is a functioning alcoholic will often simply deny they have a drinking problem, pointing to how well they function in their job and relationships. Dear students, here we conclude that a mental mechanism can be defined as the act or technique of coping that reduces anxiety generated by threats from unacceptable or negative impulses. Mental mechanisms which are unconscious are not to be confused with conscious coping strategies. All the mental mechanisms can be divided into two categories: the defensive mechanism and the escapist mechanism. Dear students, I hope you have understood what adjustment mechanism is. I hope you enjoyed this program. Thanks for watching.